Welcome back to Easy English Talk podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Easy English Talk podcast. I am so glad you are here with us today, and I really mean that. Priya, hello. How are you? What kind of day has it been for you?
Hi, Ryan. Honestly, it has been one of those days where everything feels just a little bit slower than usual, but I actually don't mind it. Slow days have a way of making you more aware of the world around you. How about you? How's your day going?
My day has been good, actually. I had a long conversation with a friend this morning, and I found myself doing something I don't always do. I just listened. I barely spoke, and it was honestly one of the best conversations I've had in a while.
Oh, that is so interesting that you say that. It sounds like you naturally stumbled into something really meaningful before we even started recording. I love when life gives us little previews of the topic we're about to discuss.
It really does connect, does it not? And now, hello to everyone who is joining us right now. Whether you are watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, or wherever you found us today, we are so happy to have you here.
Wherever in the world you are right now, we want you to know that this space is for you. This podcast exists because you are working hard to grow, and we want to support that journey. Your presence here today really does mean something to us.
I want to ask you something before we dive in. Where are you listening or watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I always love seeing all the different places our listeners are tuning in from.
And also, we genuinely want to know, is this podcast helping you? Is it making your English feel a little more natural, a little more comfortable? Are you noticing any change in how you understand or express yourself?
If the answer is yes, that makes our day. And if there's something you wish we would cover or a topic that you are struggling with, please write it in the comments. We read them and we take them seriously.
Now today, we are covering something that I think is going to genuinely shift the way many of you think about language learning. And I say that because most of what we're told about improving our English focuses on one thing, speaking more. But today, we want to challenge that idea in a very thoughtful way.
Today, we are discussing the value of listening more than speaking. If you have ever wondered why your English still doesn't feel natural, even after years of study, or why conversations still feel a little stiff, this episode is going to give you some real answers. Stay with us until the end, because what we share today could genuinely change how you approach your English from this point forward.
That is exactly right. And I want to say this is not about telling you to stop speaking. It's about helping you understand what needs to come first and why that order matters so much.
So let us start right at the beginning. Let us talk about the problem. Priya, in your experience, what do most English learners misunderstand about how language learning actually works?
I think the biggest misunderstanding is that fluency is built through speaking. Most learners believe that if they just practice talking more, in classes, with partners, with apps, their English will naturally improve. And while speaking practice has its place, it cannot do the job alone.
And why not? What is actually missing when someone only focuses on speaking?
What's missing is the raw material. Think of it this way. A chef cannot cook without ingredients, and a speaker cannot express ideas naturally without first having absorbed a rich supply of language.
That is a really clear way to think about it. The language you're trying to produce has to come from somewhere, and that somewhere is listening.
Exactly. Every natural phrase, every instinctive response, every effortless sentence that a fluent speaker produces, all of it comes from years and years of listening and absorbing language from the world around them. Speaking just releases what listening has put in.
And when learners try to speak without enough listening, what happens?
What happens is that they reach for language and find very little there. They end up translating from their first language, which creates sentences that sound grammatically strange. Or they use the same limited set of phrases over and over, which makes conversations feel repetitive and flat.
I think many of our listeners will recognize that feeling immediately. You know what you want to say, but the English version just does not come out the way you mean it.
Yes, and that gap between what you want to say and what you can say is a listening gap. It is not a speaking gap. You cannot fix it by speaking more. You fix it by listening more.
So this is the core of the problem. Learners are working very hard, but they are working at the wrong thing. They're trying to pour water out of a cup that has never been filled.
That is such a perfect way to put it. And it is not their fault. This is what most English education focuses on. Speaking practice, grammar drills, vocabulary tests, but not enough deep, patient listening.
And so learners get frustrated. They feel like they are failing when actually they have just been given the wrong tools for the job. Understanding that is the first step to real progress.
And once you understand it, you can start doing things differently. You can start making choices that truly build your fluency from the inside out. And it begins with changing your relationship with listening.
So let us talk about what that change actually looks like. Let us start with something very basic, the difference between hearing and listening, because they are not the same thing at all.
They really are not. Hearing is automatic. Your ears pick up sound without any effort from you. Listening is a choice. It is intentional, active, and engaged.
And most of the time, when English learners say they are practicing listening, they are really just hearing. They put on an English show while they do other things. They let a podcast play in the background while they cook or drive.
And that has some small value. Your brain does absorb some things possibly, but it is a very slow and shallow kind of learning compared to what happens when you truly listen.
So, what does truly listening look like? How does someone move from passive hearing into active listening?
It starts with giving your full attention to one piece of content. You sit down, remove distractions, and you commit to being fully present with what you are hearing. No phone, no background tasks, just you and the audio or video.
And then what?
Then you engage with it. You don't just let the words float by. You follow the meaning, track the ideas, and notice the way sentences are built. You are not just a receiver, you are a participant.
That is the mental posture of an active listener. You are leaning in, not sitting back. And that shift makes an enormous difference.
It really does. Because when you are truly engaged, your brain starts making connections much faster. Words stick, patterns emerge, meaning becomes clearer. And all of that happens naturally, without any memorization.
Let us talk about what happens to your vocabulary when you listen actively and consistently, because I think this surprises a lot of people.
It surprises almost everyone. Most learners think the way to grow their vocabulary is to study word lists, look up definitions, write words in a notebook, test themselves with flashcards. And all of that is effort, but it is not very effective.
Because the words do not stick?
They do not stick deeply. You might remember a word the day after you studied it, but a week later it has often faded because you only know its definition, not its life.
What do you mean by its life?
A word's life is everything around it, the situations it appears in, the emotions connected to it, the other words it naturally travels with, the tone in which people say it. When you only study a definition, you get the skeleton of a word. But when you hear a word used in a real sentence, in a real context, with real emotion, you get the whole living thing.
And that living version of the word stays with you.
It stays with you much longer, yes. And not just longer, it stays in a way that you can actually use it. You do not just know what the word means in theory. You know how it feels, when to say it, and what it sounds like in a real sentence.
There is actually a name for this kind of word knowledge in language research. It's sometimes called receptive knowledge turning into productive knowledge, when you have heard a word so many times that it's ready to come out of you naturally.
That is exactly it. And listening is the bridge between those two kinds of knowledge. The more you listen, the more words make that crossing from the receptive to the productive.
So for any listener who wants a more natural, richer vocabulary, the answer is not more word lists. The answer is more listening, more hours of hearing real English in real situations.
And it does not have to be complicated. Podcasts, interviews, audiobooks, conversations, films with subtitles. All of these are rich sources of real vocabulary in natural context. The key is to engage with them actively and consistently.
Now, let us move to something that many learners find deeply personal, pronunciation. Because most people struggle with pronunciation, and most people do not understand why.
Pronunciation is one of those areas where effort alone does not seem to work. Learners practice, and sometimes things improve. But other times they keep making the same sounds wrong no matter how much they try.
And why does that happen?
It happens because they are trying to produce a sound they have not yet clearly heard. The ear and the mouth are deeply connected. Your mouth tries to copy what your ear has learned. If the ear has not learned the sound precisely, the mouth cannot copy it well.
So it's not a mouth problem at all.
Often it is entirely an ear problem. The learner thinks they are hearing the difference between two sounds, but their ear has not yet been trained finely enough to catch it. And so the mouth produces something in between, which sounds wrong to native speakers.
This is really important for our listeners to understand. If you have sounds in English that you consistently get wrong, the answer is not to practice saying them more. The answer is to practice hearing them more.
Precisely.
Find recordings of those specific sounds. Listen to them slowly, repeatedly. Try to hear the smallest details, the position in the mouth, the length of the sound, the way the voice behaves.
And here is a technique that I have heard works very well. Before you try to say a sound, close your eyes and hear it in your mind. Play it back in your memory several times. Let your brain really absorb the exact sound before you try to produce it.
That technique is called auditory imaging, and it is used by musicians and language learners alike. The brain prepares for production by first building a very clear internal model of the target sound. The clearer the model, the better the reproduction.
So once again, input before output, listening before speaking. The pattern holds in every area of language learning.
It really does, and it is so logical when you step back and think about it. Nobody would expect a musician to play a piece of music they had never heard before, but we expect language learners to speak language they have barely listened to.
That inconsistency is at the heart of why so many learners struggle. They are being asked to produce before they have received, and the results are frustrating for everyone involved.
So the shift is simple in concept, even if it takes commitment in practice. Listen more than you speak, receive more than you produce, and trust that the speaking will come naturally, confidently, and correctly when the time is right.
Let us now talk about something that comes up in almost every English learner's experience, and that is the moment when they are in a real conversation and they feel completely lost. Has that happened to you, Priya, even with your own language experience?
Oh, absolutely. And I think most people have had that feeling. Someone is talking, you understand the individual words, but somehow the whole meaning just slips away. You nod along, hoping nobody asks you a direct question.
That experience has a name. It is sometimes called listening overload, and it happens when the brain is trying to do too many things at once.
In a conversation, you are processing words, tracking meaning, managing your emotions, and trying to prepare a response, all at the same time. That is a genuinely heavy cognitive load, and for English learners who are doing all of that in a second language, it can become completely overwhelming.
And the result is that something gets dropped. And what usually gets dropped is the listening. The learner stops tracking what is being said and focuses entirely on planning what they will say next.
Which means they miss important things. They might miss a key detail or misunderstand the speaker's main point, and then their response does not quite fit, which creates confusion on both sides.
So what is the solution here? How do you handle real conversations when everything feels too fast and too much?
The first solution is something that feels uncomfortable, but is actually completely normal. It is slowing down, not speaking faster, slowing down your internal response time.
What does that look like in practice?
It means allowing yourself a pause before you speak. When someone finishes talking, do not rush to fill the silence. Take 2 or 3 seconds to let what you just heard settle before you respond.
And does that pause feel strange to other people?
Not at all. In fact, in most cultures and communication styles, a brief pause before responding is seen as a sign of thoughtfulness. It tells the other person that you actually heard them and are thinking about what to say.
That is the opposite of how most learners feel. They think a pause looks like confusion or weakness, but actually it looks like intelligence.
Exactly. And from a practical standpoint, that pause gives your brain the time it needs. Time to process what was said, find the right words, and form a response that actually connects to the conversation.
And this is a skill. Like any skill, it gets easier with practice. The more you do it, the more natural those pauses feel.
And as your listening improves over time, the pauses get shorter too, because your brain gets faster at processing. You train it by giving it the right input and the right practice.
Let us also talk about something called listening signals. These are tiny words and sounds that speakers use during a conversation to show they are following along, and they are incredibly useful for English learners.
You hear these all the time in natural English conversation. Things like, right, I see, of course, sure, that makes sense, go ahead, oh really, and I know. They seem small, but they do a very important job.
What job is that?
They tell the speaker that you are present, that you are listening, that you are engaged with what they are saying, and they keep the conversation flowing naturally without any awkward gaps.
And they also buy you a little time.
Yes, and that is the beautiful thing about them. A simple right or I see gives you a second or two to catch up on what was just said. It's like a small breath in the middle of the conversation.
For any learner who feels nervous in conversations, learning these small signals is one of the fastest ways to feel more natural. Not because they hide your nerves, but because they give you rhythm, and rhythm is one of the keys to sounding fluent.
That is a really important point. Fluency is not just about accuracy. It's about rhythm, timing, and flow, and listening signals help you step into that rhythm.
Now let's talk about something that goes even deeper than technique, and that is the emotional side of listening. Because language is not just information, it's also feeling.
This is something I feel very strongly about. When someone is speaking to you, they are not just transmitting data. They are sharing their experience, their perspective, their feeling. And the best listeners pick up on all of that.
And picking up on the emotional layer of communication, is that something you can learn?
You can absolutely learn it. And the way you learn it is, again, through listening. But not just listening to the words, listening to everything around the words.
Such as?
The speed of the person's speech, whether they slow down on certain words and rush through others. The tone of their voice, whether it's warm, uncertain, excited, or guarded. These are all signals, and they tell you far more than the words alone.
And when you respond to those signals, when you acknowledge the emotion and not just the information, something wonderful happens in the conversation.
The connection deepens. The other person feels genuinely heard, and that feeling of being truly heard is one of the most powerful things one human can give to another.
And in English, this kind of deep listening is not just a social nicety. It's a real communication skill that people notice and value, especially in professional environments.
In the workplace, the people who are considered good communicators are often not the loudest or the most articulate. They are the ones who listen carefully, ask good questions, and respond in ways that show they understood.
And why does that work so well?
For several reasons. First, it confirms that you understood correctly, or it reveals that you did not, which gives the speaker a chance to clarify immediately. Second, it shows the speaker that you were paying close attention. And third, it gives the whole conversation a stronger foundation because both people are working from the same understanding.
And that technique works just as well outside the workplace, in personal conversations, in social situations, even in casual chats with friends. It is a human technique, not just a professional one.
Absolutely. And when people experience being listened to this carefully, they almost always feel more comfortable and more willing to open up. That is the power of real listening. It creates safety.
Let us shift to another dimension of listening that is really important for English learners, and that is exposure to different accents, because English sounds very different depending on where you are in the world.
This is something that classroom English education tends to ignore completely. Most courses teach a clean standard accent, often American or British, but real English is so much richer and more varied than that.
Why does that become a problem?
It becomes a problem the moment the learner steps into the real world. They meet an English speaker from Scotland or Australia or South Africa or Jamaica, and suddenly they cannot understand a thing, not because their English is bad, but because their ear has not been trained widely enough.
So the solution is to listen to a wide variety of accents.
That is the solution. Start with the variety that feels most familiar to you, whatever is closest to what you have been studying, but gradually introduce others. Watch content from different English-speaking regions. Listen to podcasts made by people from different parts of the world.
And at first, it might feel very difficult.
It will feel difficult, but here's something encouraging. The discomfort fades much faster than people expect. Your brain is remarkably good at tuning to new sounds once you give it consistent exposure.
After how long of listening to a new accent do people start to feel more comfortable with it?
Research suggests that even a few hours of focused listening to a new accent can make a meaningful difference. The key is the quality of the listening, active, attentive engagement, not just the quantity. 10 focused minutes can be more powerful than 2 distracted hours.
So this does not have to be a years-long project. You can make real progress with a new accent in a surprisingly short time.
You really can. And when you have trained your ear to handle many different accents, you become a truly flexible English communicator. You are no longer limited to understanding only one version of the language.
That flexibility is a form of fluency in itself. It shows that you have internalized the deep patterns of English, not just the surface sounds of one particular variety.
And it opens doors. It means you can connect genuinely with English speakers from anywhere in the world.
And that is one of the most exciting things about learning this language.
Let us now talk about how listening connects to another skill that many learners work hard on, writing. Because I think most people see listening and writing as completely separate.
Most people do, but they are actually very closely related. And once you understand the connection, it changes the way you approach both.
What is the connection?
When you listen to a lot of natural English, you build an internal sense of how the language sounds. And when you sit down to write, that internal sound guides you. You are not just putting words on a page. You are hearing the sentence in your head as you write it.
And if the sentence sounds right internally, it is much more likely to actually be correct.
Much more likely. Strong listeners often write with a natural ease that grammar-focused learners do not have, because they are not calculating rules. They are following the sound of the language that they have internalized.
This is true even for native speakers. Good writers are almost always avid readers and listeners. They have absorbed so much language that correct flowing sentences come naturally.
And for English learners, the path is the same. Read more, listen more, and then writing will feel less like construction work and more like expression.
That distinction is beautiful. Construction work versus expression. One feels like building something with effort and tools. The other feels like releasing something that was already there.
And both can get you to the same result, a correct sentence. But expression is so much more fluid, so much more natural, and so much more enjoyable. It is the feeling that most learners are chasing.
And listening is the path that gets you there. Let us also speak about reading and its relationship to listening, because I think this is worth mentioning.
Yes, reading and listening reinforce each other beautifully. When you have done a lot of listening, your reading becomes more natural because you hear the language inside your head as you read. The sentences have music to them.
And on the other side, reading widely gives you exposure to more vocabulary and more sentence structures, which then helps you understand when you listen.
It is a beautiful loop. Listening improves reading. Reading improves listening, and together they give your speaking and writing a richness that studying grammar alone simply cannot produce.
I want to take a moment now to address something that our listeners might be feeling as they hear all of this, and that is a kind of quiet worry, a feeling that maybe they have been doing things wrong.
I want to speak directly to that feeling. If you have been studying English for years and relying mostly on speaking practice, you have not been doing it wrong. You have been working with the tools you are given.
And all of that work was not wasted. The grammar you learned, the vocabulary you studied, the speaking practice you put in, all of it has value. It is part of your foundation.
What today is about is adding something, not replacing what you have done, just adding a deeper, more consistent layer of listening to everything you are already doing.